I'm State Representative Leslie Harrod. I represent House District 8 in Denver. I'm also the chair of the Black Caucus for the state of Colorado.
When you introduce yourself to people, when you're not in lawmaker mode, what do you say?
I'm Leslie. Pretty straightforward. You know, I want people to believe and understand that this process can be accessible to those who are often not a part of the process, and so I try to be as approachable as possible.
Yeah, why are you a lawmaker?
You know, I'm a lawmaker because for too long I think we haven't had representation that looks like me. I mean, I'm the first Black, queer, LGBT elected official in Colorado, but also because my community needs representation and deserves a seat at the table. And so, following in the footsteps of my mentor, former state representative Rosemary Marshall, I decided to come in here, be bold, use the skills that I have to make real change for the lives of the people of Colorado.
It's been a year.
Yeah.
Tell me about your past year.
Yeah. This year has been, I would say, extremely difficult. With immense change comes immense conflict. And with starting with the coronavirus pandemic and the racism pandemic that has kind of risen to the top. You add in the murder of George Floyd, the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, and it just has created kind of a hotbed of division. And in all of the work that I have tried to do, it has been done in a way that has been bipartisan. But this year is just very different. You see a lot of resistance from both sides to working together on policy, on real policy that will change lives. And I think it is a disservice to us all. And so in Colorado, I know that the state Democrats are trying very hard to bridge that divide, to ensure that we are reaching across the aisle as much as possible. But it's not always met with open arms. I believe that because we've made so much change, that there's just immense backlash. And the backlash from people who, though they might be a few, is very loud. And so that has, I think, tainted the process a bit.
Do you remember when you found out about George Floyd's death?
Yeah, absolutely. I found out about George Floyd's death, I think probably quite earlier on in the process, so probably a few days after his murder. But I remember very quickly and distinctly trying to avoid the video on my timeline, saying, I'm not going to watch this, I don't want to see it, and just, keep scrolling. But you can't really do that, I mean, his murder was broadcast across the world on every single platform. And so eventually I said, all right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch this video. It was very intentional. And when I saw it, it stirred something in my soul. Once again, another Black man murdered at the hands of law enforcement who didn't deserve to die. And being in the position that I'm in now, my question was, well, what am I going to do about it? We can't keep seeing murders like this and either thinking they're isolated incidences or thinking that law enforcement is just going to fix the problem themselves. It's going to take all of us working together to make real change. And so, honestly, that's what I set out to do.
How long after you saw that video did you start drafting that bill?
That's an interesting question. I had portions of the bill written previously because of the murder of Elijah McClain and Devon Bailey in Colorado Springs. But I did not have the support to introduce the bill. And so after I saw the murder and basically a couple days after the protests started, that's when I started drafting the new bill. So we were in pretty much the first day of protests right here in Denver. We were in the Capitol. We had just come back from a recess because of COVID, and there was protests happening right outside of our door. I went down to join the protest after we were done with session, just to kind of see what was going on and hear folks. And it was small, it was about 100 people. And in that moment, someone shot 8 gunshots into the crowd and some even into the building. And I was pulled away by State Patrol and brought into the building on lockdown. The whole building was put on lockdown. And I just remember talking to my colleagues and saying, I appreciate, they were worried about me, of course, and I was like, I appreciate you being worried, but I want a bill. I want you to support reform. We need to do something to change what is happening to people who look like me and you, and we need to do it now. We need to make sure that we have protections for people on the streets, our communities, and we need to hold law enforcement officers accountable if they are bad actors. And to my surprise, I think, and my very gratefulness, they said yes. And not only did I have the ability to introduce a bill in a very condensed session and the permission to do so, I had the support of every single one of my Democratic colleagues. And so we began crafting that bill basically the next day. We pulled in the Senate, and my Senate colleagues joined on as well. Senate President Leroy Garcia led the charge in the Senate. And now you see what we have today, which is Senate Bill 217. And I will say that I was very surprised and grateful that the Republicans signed on as well. I will tell you what we have here in Colorado under Senate Bill 217 and extended 1250 now as well is truly the product of bipartisan work. We worked together day and night to find a bill that would work for Colorado. And quite frankly, I believe that we found that and we struck that balance. We would not have been able to do it without the support of my Democratic colleagues, but also we would not have such strong policy without the support of my Republican colleagues who signed on as well. And so I'm proud to say that Colorado is the first state in this nation to pass such reforms. And I'm proud to say that the reforms that we have created are working already.
Would that have been possible without George Floyd being murdered?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We have had other murders. We've had the murder of Elijah McClain that was terrible. But it wasn't until the uprising from the murder of George Floyd did we even really know what happened to Elijah McClain. And since George Floyd's murder and the protests, Elijah McClain has really risen to the top as well. And as the globe knows who Elijah McClain is and how he was unjustly murdered as well. And so I believe that George Floyd in his death and murder is a huge catalyst for change across the country. And just 1 year later, you see dozens of pieces of legislation that is passed across the country to ensure that there is accountability and these types of murders don't occur again. Now, what I think is interesting is that we can, I believe, all agree that the murder of George Floyd was wrong. But we don't agree that there should be penalties for those officers. We don't all agree that there should be change in that department. We don't all agree that this happens time and time again in other places. It just might not be caught on camera. And so, again, it's so important that we have laws and policies that not only back up how we believe law enforcement should be acting in our community, but hold them accountable when they don't.
What's changed for you in the last year personally? Like, not what you changed here at the State House.
Yeah. What's changed for me personally is I have great hope for the future of this country and this state. I will say I've been optimistic in the past, but I didn't really know and think that we could push such bold policy and change such entrenched institutions using the power of the people and the power of our elected positions. I know now that we can. Our only limitation is ourselves. And so I sit here a year later with much hope, knowing and empowerment, knowing that we can do so much more.
Before this, do you think these were conversations that Republicans wouldn't have even had? They wouldn't have been engaged in?
Absolutely, these were conversations that not only Republicans wouldn't have, but Democrats wouldn't have either. There were certain Democrats who would not vote for law enforcement accountability. I mean, you could see that in our laws in Colorado. We've had people introduce bills in the past after other murders, 2015, 2005, where we did not see such action. Either the bills were killed or they were watered down to things that were not effective and clearly did not change the use of force in Colorado. And so things have changed. And I'm proud to say that. I'm proud to say that regardless of your party, people are saying we want change. And honestly, law enforcement has joined the conversation too. I'm proud to work with our Denver chief, Paul Pazin, in reimagining policing. He was in support of 217. He's in support of even more measures that ensure that law enforcement is very clear on their role in the community, has a very clear use of force standard, and can be held accountable to that standard. And so while we don't always agree on everything, the conversations have been invaluable.
Do you think about the fact that it took one more Black man dying to do that, and the toll that it's taken to make this possible to have these conversations?
Absolutely. People shouldn't have to die for us to make change. But one thing that I think is incumbent upon us as elected leaders and community leaders as well is to make sure that that death is not in vain. And that we do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. No mother, spouse, child deserves to be without their loved one because we didn't do the job to make sure that that didn't happen. When we were in the first days of the protests here in Denver, and we started talking about Senate Bill 217, we had a rally on the Capitol steps. I brought out, the Senate President and others to really talk about what we were doing here in Colorado, and to let the protesters know that there was something to fight for, And we passed the mic around to anyone who wanted to speak. And up came a woman, short, slight in nature, very quiet. And she said, "Can I have the mic?" And someone looked at me and said, "That's Shanine McClain." And I said, "Okay, sure." I passed the mic to her. And in that moment, she looked at the crowd, she looked at me, and she said, "Why weren't you here for my son? Why does it take someone being murdered states away for you to take action? Why didn't you take action for Elijah?" And I remember people were like, "Oh, do you want us to stop her or whatever?" And I was like, "No, she's right. She's right. Why didn't we, And so from then on, she was a part of the process and a part of the negotiations in 217 every step of the way after that, because she deserved to be there, and she was right. We should have done that after the murder of Elijah McClain. But we have a moment and momentum to keep creating change and to keep his name alive in a way where Shanine can feel like, hopefully, there is some justice that's being served after the murder of her son. She was there when the bill passed the House. She was there when the votes changed from, the board changed from red to green, and you saw not only Democrats but Republicans stepping up and saying, "What happened to your son was wrong, and we're going to do something about it." And so we can never bring true justice to Shanine or the family of George Floyd, because true justice would be that they wouldn't be dead in the first place, right? But what we can do is do everything that we possibly can to make sure that their death meant something and changed something and ensure that someone else does not die.
It's been a year. A lot has changed. What more needs to change?
Well, we have two bills running through the process right now, House Bill 1250 and 1251, that continue the process of law enforcement accountability, making sure that all law enforcement, including State Patrol, have no qualified immunity, and, looking at body cameras and accountability. But these are just bills, We still have to really shift the culture within law enforcement if we really want to see change. That has been made so clear and evident with what happened in Loveland, where you saw, Karen Gardner being treated so terribly, an elderly woman with dementia, by law enforcement, and then laughing about it afterwards. And there was an investigation, and it yielded nothing. Not until we got that body camera footage, not until the family, who was persistent in their quest for justice, sent that information out into the world and said, these people are not being held accountable. I am proud to say that the charges have been brought against those officers now, but they have been brought only because of the passage of Senate Bill 217. What happened to Karen Gardner happened 2 weeks after we passed our bill. And if we did not have Senate Bill 217 in place in the time that we did, those officers would not be facing charges today. And so there is change being made because of our bill, even though the whole entire bill has not even been effective yet, not been enacted yet. And so we have to do more to make sure that what we're doing is working, to make sure that the culture is changing, to make sure that if we elect sheriffs, that they actually want to serve and protect our communities and aren't a part of the faction that wants to divide. And that, again, we're holding folks accountable. What do these internal investigation processes look like? Why were they let off until the video was made public? And so we have so much more to do. And I think we have to also address our issues with race. To me, it is very clear that if Karen Gardner was a young Black man or a Black woman, that we would not have the same outcome and public outcry. And I think we have to ask ourselves why and continue to address the racism that exists within this country.
And do you have any questions?
We talked to a man who, while he was pretty positive, he wasn't necessarily as hopeful as you. said, like, how do we fix something when the weapon is skin color?
Yeah.
What do you have to say to someone like him? He owns a boxing gym in Fort Collins.
Yeah, I mean, the racism is part of the pandemic. It's a huge part of the problem. It is the root of the problem. And so we do need to address that. And again, that's why we have to look at culture change. That's why I talk to my white, brown, Asian, indigenous friends and say, Black friends, and say, what are you doing to address the racism that is in this country and in our everyday conversations and in our lives? It doesn't always mean passing policy, but are you having the conversation at your kitchen table? Are you having really tough conversations when you're at brunch with your friends saying, what is my role in this movement to really root out racism in this country, and everyone stepping up and doing something about it and no longer excusing racism, no longer excusing it. That is something that I try to live my life as a value, and I hope other people do as well. It's not easy. It can be extremely exhausting, but it's something that we have to do.